Welcome to a special series called The Global Crisis Monitor, featured on the Treasury Update podcast. Thank you for joining. Each week, the Treasury Coalition, a group of Treasury-oriented firms which you can find on treasurycoalition.com, promotes a global survey covering critical issues and responses whenever a significant disruption is underway. This podcast shares key information from the surveys and analysis of the broader market to support the profession in optimizing current response and future preparation. The weekly surveys run from Wednesday through Tuesday, and results are shared each week via a podcast and digital report. Sign up on treasurycoalition.com and take the 5-minute survey each week. We appreciate your participation and teamwork. On this episode of the podcast, special host Meredith Zonsius catches up with Alexa Cook and Craig Jeffery of Strategic Treasurer on the third wave of results from the weekly COVID-19 Impact and Response Survey. This new iteration of the micro-survey reveals how respondents feel about their organization's outlook on liquidity positions, the timing for paying vendors and suppliers, and the biggest hurdle to overcome in order to maintain Treasury processes amid the pandemic. Listen into this brief discussion on how Treasury and finance organizations are being impacted during these unprecedented times. Well, welcome to the show, Craig and Alexa.
Thanks, Meredith. Happy to be here.
It's good to be here in separate places at safe distances.
Yes, absolutely. So we've just completed the third week of the monitor. Let's start with the headline. What are key takeaways?
So some of the key takeaways are the economic optimism for 1 year has now turned negative, which is indicating that there is increasing concern on fixing the problem economically might be something bigger and a longer task than before.
Yeah, that's a good point. The other one, there's a couple other things I wanted to mention. One was the concerns about loan covenants and MAC clauses, or material adverse condition clauses. That did a complete shift from a positive number to very negative. That's a very stark change, so that's significant. The other headline type item that we want to talk about, this is our third completed week of the Global Crisis Monitor. The move home has been hard to manage by a number of accounts, connecting to all systems, managing staff. Those have been some challenges, not major, but still significant, showing up in quite a few results. And I'll just give a quick recap over the first 3 weeks. So the business continuity plan, making sure that was in place, working well, was one of the top concerns. The second week, it seemed like we had a lot of feedback about cross-training and making sure there's enough depth on that, considering that certain people may be getting sick or ill or caring for family members in that case. This week, it seems like the emphasis is turning, I need to get more efficient at home. Connecting to all my systems isn't working quite as well, and I have to adapt to that. So that's the list of some of the headlines.
There's a lot of adjustments for sure. Any positive headlines?
Yeah, there is a positive headline, and that's the perception of respondents on their headquarter countries. They feel that headquarter countries are definitely handling the pandemic in a better way, or that has just improved overall.
Let's get into some of the details of this week's results. How are people feeling about their organization's outlook on liquidity positions?
This is definitely a point of anxiety or nerves for a lot of people. The outlook on liquidity is not the best, especially with a lot of that stemming from AR or accounts receivables. There's definitely a lot of negativity kind of coming from that area, which is pushing then into the full liquidity of it all.
Really, week over week, it's continued to deteriorate the overall view on liquidity. And as Alexa said, AR is one factor that's been contributing to that.
Compared to typical times, what is the timing for paying vendors and suppliers? How is this impacting businesses?
Yeah, so that was one of the questions that we were asked to add to the survey because there was so much negativity around the AR side. So what's happening on the AP side? So on the payment side, just over half indicated that their AP process and their paying vendors and suppliers is really staying about the same. We asked questions about, are you spending more rapidly to support critical vendors and suppliers, or you're just sped up to support, most of our vendors and suppliers. That was pretty minimal response. Just over 2% said that they had sped up payments to support some of their key suppliers. So that's really, really minimal. And if you look at it's been extended to staffing movements, getting people working remotely, working from home. You add in impacts caused by third-party providers who may be involved in the payables process. And the third option we gave was it was extended due to intentionally conserving cash and managing our cash flow. You come up with a pretty interesting number there. You're north of a third. You're right, somewhere about a third of organizations are paying slower than they typically are. So that's a little bit of the other side of the we're concerned about AR, and about a third of organizations are paying a bit slower. Now, happily, almost half of that is due to people shifting to workers working from home.
Interesting. So let's talk recovery perceptions, health and economic.
I'll take the health piece of that. So this has definitely been a point that is improving week over week. It's always been, on average, pretty neutral. But I definitely think that the health perspective kind of deals with people. And I think it ties back in with how people are responding about their organization. So they're happy with how the people at the organizations are handling things, and they seem pretty neutral on how they will personally be impacted, from a health and safety perspective. So I think those tie together pretty well.
And what about economic?
Yeah, the economic time frame that we're looking at, and those that download the report can be used to seeing these three stacked up. When we reach inflection point, when we reach the point where there's a minimal health impact, and then when do we think we'll reach a point where on the economic side, it's pretty much the point of normalcy. And that number's been fairly negative, and it's worse this week too, as you might expect from the other components. So we see that as falling into the middle of the 7 to 9 month range, where they think most businesses are expecting it to reach a static level of what they were doing prior to the pandemic. So this is exactly what Alexa said at the beginning about the 1 year outlook. It's, people are really thinking that's going to take their organization a little bit longer than they did last week and the week before to reach financial normalcy. So general a negative trend in this time frame.
So what are you going to be watching over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, I'll take that. I think we really want to watch the economic optimism or pessimism out to the different time domains that we're looking at, 3 months and a year. And we also want to see if there's any correlation to the view of the length of the health impact, and if those seem to be more correlated than they are now. So those are a couple areas to watch. I'd also like to see what happens with the concern about some of the loan covenants. That's turned really negative. I want to see if that improves. And I guess the last thing is, we're watching and seeing, some of these central government support programs to businesses and individuals. I want to see how that helps, if that shores up some of the strength and thus the optimism of some of the organizations that will be tapping into that. How long will that take to have funds dispersed to support those businesses and where that goes.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for sharing, Craig and Alexa.
Thanks, Meredith.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith.
We wanted to encourage you to take the Global Crisis Monitor survey repeatedly while it's live. It runs from Wednesday to Tuesday every week. You can go to treasurycoalition.com and follow the links. Add your voice and insight so that as a profession, we can take positive and knowledgeable steps to move our organizations and nations forward. Invest 5 minutes each week at treasurycoalition.com and get great information and insights while helping our profession and organizations.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.